So, hello everyone. Probably a few of you know me from Greater One Street. I'm one of the neurology fellows there. And I have Dominic here on the other picture, whom I'm very, very proud to present, who would describe himself as a pediatric intensive care trainee, REACH co-chair, self-proclaimed junior doctor pay expert, clueless wine snob, and most importantly, a fried chicken expert. So truly a CV to envy. Well done for this. And we are here tonight, not just because I'm selfish and I'm clueless about my PaySlip, and I have never really understood what's on it, but because when we ask you, interestingly, many of you voted for this topic as a very, very highly interesting topic for you. So apparently, it seems like we are all very, very unknowledgeable, and we're all collectively confused, which is both comforting and a little bit terrifying. So honestly, I think it's quite normal for mainly for an IMG not to understand really about your payslip and your salary, because if you think in your country, you probably know what you get paid. You all get paid the same. There are no different contracts. You know what your taxes are. It's a little bit more just logical. Whereas you get to the UK and you if you are able to get into your payslip, it seems like literally like a cryptic labyrinth in which there are numbers, words that are insulting you. You don't understand them. You just give up. And so I thought it would be amazing to hear from the expert who made himself very knowledgeable about this and understand a bit more what do we do, on which contract we are we getting paid fairly? How can we do a little bit more on investigation of how can we save money? Is there anything we can do to opt out, for example, of your pension scheme if you're not planning to stay here longer in the UK? Or just generally, what is actually my payslip? So Dominic, what is our payslip?
Cool. Thank you so much. Let me just share some stuff. And while I'm just getting this up, the very first thing I want to say is it's absolutely not just IMGs that don't know anything about pay and pay slips. Almost everyone I've spoken to, like the entire resident doctor body and most consultants, have no idea about any of this stuff as well. So you're in good company if you don't know what is going on with your pay. Just as a little bit of introduction, I guess more of a declaration of interest. So there's three logos on the screen, hopefully. First of all, actually, Barbara, can you see a big screen and you can't see my notes saying if you can read
I
this?
can, and I don't see your cheat sheet, so you're fine.
Lovely, great. Um, Yeah, so there's three logos. I obviously am not in any way kind of affiliated with Soft Landings, but I'm incredibly honored to be asked to come and speak for them and to all of you because I think the work that they do is absolutely incredible. So thank you so much to Nadia and Barbara for inviting me to come along, and I hope this will be useful for people and you won't just be bored stiff after an hour and a half. The other two things, so I am part of the London School of Pediatrics Less Than Full-Time and Working Lives subgroup, where we kind of support doctors across London with most issues to do with working and living their lives. And then most importantly, a proper declaration of interest. So after spending half a decade working on pay and supporting colleagues and trying to get paid correctly and understanding this stuff, me and one of my colleagues called Hermione, if you work in London, you might have come across her, Hermione Leach. We founded a little business called Doctors Paycheck, specifically designed to provide tools for doctors to check that they're being paid correctly and try and, provide education and guidance. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later with a little bit of a sales pitch and an advert, but more importantly, let's get into it. So I'm going to start with a little anecdote, but before I do, although Nadia has asked me to mainly not ask questions and can pick questions up at the end, if you do have anything you want to ask as we go through, I am more than happy to be interrupted. Just put it in the chat or unmute yourself and tell me you don't know what on earth I'm talking about. Please feel free to be as interactive as you want. I normally like to do this stuff in person so I can watch people's reactions go as I explain about how wrong their pay always is. But please do chat to me as we go along.
Tom, I'm happy to read out the questions if there's anyone asking questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You.
Okay, so first a little story and a pretty picture. So when was it? It was kind of around the COVID-y type stuff. So maybe 21, 22. Me and my other half went on a very much a once in a lifetime holiday to South America. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. And we went to Patagonia in Chile, and this is a view from our hotel room, and there were horses and mountains, and it was absolutely incredible. And the whole trip cost us about £3,000, just over. So not insane, but like quite a lot of money. And not many people have that much money kicking around. It was a big thing. We feel very lucky to have done it. Funny thing about that year is I was looking at Katie, my other half's pay, and I noticed that she had been underpaid by about £3,000 that year. Um, so that was nice. We got a big chunk of money back, and that funded a lot of the trip, which was lovely. But more importantly, that same year, I was also being underpaid by £25,000 per year by the NHS trust that I was working for. That is not an exaggeration, that's an actual figure. And most of you would sit there and go, like, surely anyone would notice that, right? If someone's like, I'm being paid by quarter of 100 grand, it's an insane amount. Even more fun story is the guy that was in the post before me, who was also being underpaid by £25,000, didn't notice and didn't know. He was very happy when I pointed it out, and he got about 15K into his bank account in one go. And then when the person who took over my position started the job, they also tried to underpay her by £25,000 as well. So it just persisted. So these stories of gross underpayments are incredibly common. And this is a quote from one of the ex kind of leads of the London School of Pediatrics subgroup that I'm in, who, after I broke the seal on pay issues with him and explained about how underpaid he was all the time, he despaired, and then he tried to do something about it. And then he got beaten down by how incredibly challenging it is to understand all of this stuff and actually do anything about it. So one of the reasons why I want to do this talk and tell as many people as possible, and why everyone who works with me is bored stiff about me talking about pay, is because the more people who understand this, and the more people who understand that it's going wrong and they're being mispaid, the easier it is for any individual to actually do something about it and get their money back. And you're not constantly up against the brick wall of HR or of systems. Um, as you can do stuff about it. And that's what I'd like you mainly to take away from this is just a little bit of education and a little bit of sharing of information with colleagues goes quite a long way in breaking down these barriers. So, how serious a problem is crazy mispayments to everybody? You thought you were here for just to talk about pay slips. I'm gonna go so much deeper than that and tell you how messed up all of this stuff is. So about a year ago, NHS England posted this on social media, saying the NHS is setting out a plan to improve the lives of junior doctors. This was just before we rebranded as resident doctors. That's lovely. We like this. Let's improve our lives. All
You
good.
just lost your slides, or it might just be me, but
Pardon?
the share is stopped.
Oh, has it stopped?
No, I can see your slides.
I
I
can
can
see
I
see
it.
it.
apologise.
Oh, great. Just you, Nadia. Sorry. It's fine. I can bore you later with all of this. Um, so yeah, a year ago, the NHS England posted this. And number one point is improving payroll accuracy. And they were like, hey, we're going to do this great thing. Imagine if any other employer in the world was like, hey, we're going to do a great thing for our employers. We're going to improve you getting paid correctly. Like, that's quite embarrassing. So it must have been quite a big deal for them to post this publicly. But it goes further. They also wrote this letter that they sent to every single trust in England talking about the unacceptable pay errors that happen for doctors and how too many doctors, they said in training, but this affects everybody, are currently experiencing payroll errors. And this came from quite literally the highest authority within the NHS. So this is the top dog saying, oops, we're getting this wrong quite a lot. And there's been lots of news articles. So this is an article in the Health Service Journal, a paper about health services, talking about how trusts had been found to be massively underpaying junior doctors for 3 years. This was a 2-year-old article, so now 5 years, leading up to seven-figure payouts. Such was the scale of the underpayments, and no prizes for guessing who told this journal about this issue. But it's not just that. This is a piece in the BMA about the Allocate e-rota system, one of the biggest systems responsible for rotoring and calculating all of our pay. Many of you will be at Great Ormond Street. Great Ormond Street use this system, and the calculations, the basic fundamental calculations to calculate a doctor's salary were just wrong, like totally wrong. And it took a long time for us to actually get people to sit up and take notice. So my journey with all of this started back in 2019, actually when I first went less than full time. And I was like, this doesn't seem right. This is kind of confusing. How is this calculated? And I noticed that my pay was wrong. And then I looked at my colleague next to me and their pay was wrong. Then I looked at all of my colleagues in the department and all of their pay was wrong. And I was like, we should tell someone. So we made a poster. And it was about weekend calculations. Oops. And we thought we solved a massive issue, but let's just check a couple of other things and see if that's done correctly. And we just did not know how deep that rabbit hole went. We found errors everywhere. Almost every single doctor's pay that we looked at was wrong. It was happening in every single trust, regardless of whether you were senior, junior, full-time, less than full-time, and it was to the tune of thousands of pounds. And in fact, I kind of stopped counting, but I think if you add up all of the underpayments that I would have been subject to had I not noticed, excluding the 25k, which is a particularly unique situation. But if you add all of the rest of them up, it still comes to somewhere like £30,000 over my training to date. So these issues are massive. So the obvious question is, how on earth has this been allowed to happen? Well, it's because this process is ludicrously complicated. To get from the work that you do to your pay every month, there are lots of different processes. Now, this is particularly for the new contract. I'll talk to you more about that in a second. But most of this is generalizable to kind of everybody. And there are multiple steps, and things go wrong at every single one of these steps. So over the next however long we've got, hour or so, I'm going to talk to you about a bunch of different things and hopefully get you a little bit more clued into all of these issues, hopefully not cause too much despair, and yeah, enlighten you all. So we're going to start by talking about the two different contracts that people are on. I know that I think everyone answered a little question at the start of this about are you on the old contract 2002 or the new 2016, and it's a bit confusing, and I'll explain that. I will talk about the pay uplifts that people have received. Well, they received some in last November. They're going to be receiving some again in August, and about what that means. We will talk about tax and other deductions. We will talk about pay slips, those lovely confusing documents that you should be getting each month. And then just some tips and tricks, and then hopefully lots of time for questions. And I can see some questions coming into the chat. So yeah, Barbara, please do shout if there's anything kind of that is suitable to go now. Otherwise, I will ignore them and just plow on. But please do interrupt me. I'm very happy to be interrupted. A quick word of warning before I actually get into the useful stuff. Pay can go wrong in lots of different ways, but in general, it can go wrong in two distinct categories. It can go wrong in your deductions, taxes, national insurance, pensions, all of that stuff. And that's probably what most of you think is the cause of a lot of these issues. It's not. It's the most obvious stuff, and it's the stuff that people get frustrated with because they look at their tax code and like, what is this? And their pay changes all the time. But this isn't actually where the biggest issues lie. The biggest issues is in just the calculation of your annual salary or your monthly salary. And the reason why these issues are so much bigger is because your tax will, I'll talk more about this in more detail, but your tax will sort of sort itself out. But the calculation of your salary, if it's wrong, it will be wrong forever and it will never get better. So just keep these two things separate in your mind as we go through the rest of the talk. Okay, two contracts. A little bit of background. So in 2016, all of the junior doctors, we will call junior doctors then, I can say that, in England went on strike. And this is a great picture because this was actually in a load of the papers. It was in the Guardian and things, and I love it because there's me in my red hoodie looking all angry and on strike. But then if you look at the little picture, it says do not enter if showing symptoms of the rage virus, because this was actually a cinema event where they did a media bit about the junior doctor strike, and it was hilarious. But they used this picture as a lot of the like, look, doctors are on strike, and no editor noticed that all this stuff about rage virus. But anyway, so we all went on strike, and we went on strike because they wanted to impose a new contract on us. And the new contract changed a lot of the fundamentals of how we work and how we get paid. Now, we actually didn't go on strike about pay, even if some people thought that we were. We were going on strike just because they were changing the way that we were fundamentally paid and the way that that would mean that we were working. And it was probably to the detriment of a lot of things, but actually probably ultimately resulted in a pay rise. But this contract was imposed and it made things really complicated, and it totally changed the way that we were paid from something that was quite simple to something that was quite complicated. But what this means for you now is that all resident doctors, I'm switching to new terminology, so we're all resident doctors, in a training post are currently employed on a nationally agreed standard set of terms and conditions. So me in London, I am paid on exactly the same contract as a trainee in Newcastle, as in Leeds, as in Devon. We're all paid and contracted on the same nationally agreed thing. Locally employed doctors, and we'll explain a bit more about what they are in a second, but locally employed doctors, i.e. non-doctors in training, are not necessarily employed on that same contract. And just ponder to yourselves why, in terms of pay, a trust may choose to not pay you on the nationally agreed terms and conditions. Think about that for a second. So these two contracts.
Tom, can I ask? Just
Yes.
to interrupt you, because I know this is something that might not be obvious for everyone. Who is a locally employed doctor? What does it mean for an IMG? Who is locally employed?
I will skip to my next slide because it's
Oh,
really
sorry.
awesome. No, please. I'm so happy to be interrupted. It's so boring hearing your own voice for an hour. So locally employed doctors, yeah, it's not like, again, I'm going to say this is not just an IMG confusion issue. No one has a clue. So you will have heard lots of different terms: trust grade, clinical fellow, trust doctor, all of these, they're all nonsense. They're all a pile of useless old-fashioned terminology that don't mean anything. There are two categories of doctors. They're resident doctors, so formerly known as junior doctors. There are doctors who are in a deanery appointed training position, and they're all on a standard terms and conditions, and we can call ourselves trainees if we want, or something else. Anybody else, any other doctor who goes and knocks on the door of a hospital and says, "Hello, please, can I have a job?" "Yes, you can. Thank you very much." You are a locally employed doctor. And they give you all these silly names, but you are a locally employed doctor first and foremost. And that just means that instead of being employed by some central higher power, like, for example, I am, you are employed by the hospital, by the trust that has appointed you. So it's doctors that are not in a nationally agreed training program. Everybody in the resident doctor body, so not consultants or GPs or SAS doctors. There is no nationally agreed contract for you. You can be paid whatever you agree. You are an employee, you go to an employer, the employer says, "You do this work, we'll give you this salary." If they said, "We'll give you a bushel of turnips for it," and you say, "Yes, please," they will pay you a bushel of turnips. It's literally whatever you accept, that's the salary. They do usually mirror either the old contract or the new contract, which is why I'm going to talk about both of them. And I don't know anyone who's not on something that at least vaguely resembles one or the other of these things. But in reality, you're an employer, they're an employer, and you can do whatever they want. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, please do ask. So these two different contracts, the old one, the 2002, and I say ish because the 2002 contract no longer exists, it's defunct. There is a new line that says no one should be put on this contract anymore. The only reason why it still exists and why people issue kind of pay rises and talk about it is because there's a couple of trainees who are still protected on the old terms and conditions. The only reason why some of you will still be on it is because employers are choosing to keep using it because it's cheaper for them, but they won't tell you that. And so they're choosing to use this old-fashioned, outdated terms and conditions. But the way it works is really simple. You get a basic salary, and then every year that basic salary goes up. And then on top of that, you get a single supplement for out-of-hours work. I will go into this in more detail. The 2016 new, it's like a decade old, but new contract is the standard for all trainees. It is super complicated. And again, and the fundamental fact of this is it's based on your exact rota. So instead of being like, you've got a job, have a basic salary, or you do lots of on-calls, have some more money, every little bit of it is meticulously calculated and you're paid for exactly what you work. So you're basically paid by the hour. And we'll go into more about that in a second. So the 2002 pay scale. This is super straightforward. It's really simple. You are paid a basic fixed annual salary that is an amount of money, and every single doctor who is on this pay scale will receive a basic salary somewhere along a pay scale, and then you get a single banding supplement. So your salary is basically made of two components, basic pay and what's known as banding, but a supplement. If you work in London, you also get a teeny little bit extra because London is expensive. But that's it. So maximum 3 elements. And this is the current pay scale for the 2002. And it goes up to from min to 9. And when you start in the NHS, you start at min. So if you've never worked in the NHS before, you turn up, you start at min. Remember that this contract was written initially for doctors, or it was written for doctors in training. So, you start in the NHS because you've just come out of med school, you start at min. It was not designed for people who have been a consultant for 10 years and come across to the UK. If you had spent more than 2 years as an SHO, you start on 0.1, but basically you start at min when you become a registrar. When you start, you're given an increment date, and that is the date that you started. And every single year, and it's a chronological year, so every single time the Earth goes around the sun, you move up a point. It doesn't matter if you're less than full time or if you've taken time out for mat leave or anything. Every chronological year, you go up a point. And it's, based on time. So when you get a new job in the NHS and you're on this pay scale, someone will allocate you to a point on this pay scale and be like, that's your salary until next year where it will go up to the next point. If you do out of hours work, which we're mostly pediatricians, most of us will do. Oh yeah, no, more importantly, for locally employed doctors with no previous NHS experience, because this contract was written for doctors in training decades ago, there is no nationally defined way to determine which starting point you're put on. It doesn't exist. There is no way. So any employer that uses this pay scale makes something up because they can. And they could say, well, you've never worked in the NHS before, you're going to start on min. You're like, but I'm so much more senior than that. I'm like, min. Or they could recognize your experience and they could put you on 0.9. And there is nothing nationally agreed, so it's up to you and your employer to determine that. So it's really important that you check with your employer how this has been determined and whether it's been determined fairly, and if that is the agreed way that it should be done. Out of hours supplements. So if you only work up to 40 hours a week, and all of those hours are between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, you just get your basic salary. That's it. If you work more than 40 hours a week, so if you work 40 hours and 15 minutes, then you get banding, yay. Or you work any nights or any weekends or anything like that. There were way more bans in the past. There are now basically only 2 because there are more restrictions on working hours, meaning that realistically only 1B and 1A exist. 1B is a 40% extra supplement, which basically is anything above 40 hours with some out of hours work. Or including some out of hours work. So you could work 40 hours a week and do the odd weekend or the odd night shift, you get 40% uplift. You could work 48 hours a week and do loads of out of hours and lots of weekends and still be eligible for 1B, 40%. If you do lots of out of hours, so a third of your hours are out of hours, or you'd work 1 in 4 weekends or more, then you are 1A, 50% supplements. Hopefully that's relatively clear. If you're less than full time, there were these things called 2A and 2B, but that's only if you work more than 48 hours a week on average, and no one should work that anymore because it's basically a non-contractual rota. But if you do end up being rostered for more than 48 hours a week, which still happens by accident sometimes, then you basically get a lot more money, but you shouldn't be unless you want the money, in which case. If you're less than full time, it's kind of confusing. You get paid the same basic salary and the same banding as your full-time colleagues, but then everything is basically multiplied by not your proportion of less than full-time, that would be simple, but by the hours per week you work according to these brackets. So if you're, for example, I'm currently working at 70% less than full-time, but actually my contract is for 37 hours a week, just because of how the rota has fallen, which means that even though I'm 70% less than full-time, if I were on this pay scale, I should receive 90% of the full-time salary. So your basic salary or the salary that you receive may not be proportional to your less than full-time percentage. Just park that thought in the back of your mind for now if this applies to you, and we're going to circle back to it in a little bit. But just be aware that it's to do with the hours that you're rostered for, not your less than full-time percentage. That's it for 2002. It's pretty straightforward. The only massive thing is find out why you are on the pay point that you are on. And now we're going to move on to 2016, which I think from the survey.
Just a quick question, sorry. So when you say find out, how would you find out if you're a doctor and you just arrived to a new job, you're an IMG, and your HR is sitting somewhere in a marble tower?
It's really hard. You need to ask the question and you need to be a bit bolshy about it. And that's really difficult if you're coming to a new country with a new employer. In theory, sort of legally, if they're employing you on the 2002 pay scale, which pretty much everyone will be if you're not on the 2016, then they have to assign you a point on that pay scale. They have to, because that's the contract. Which means that someone at some point has made an assessment of where you should be and decided. And I mean, at Great Ormond Street, I've supported lots of people to just ask the question, and the answers that I've got back have been very varied. And some people basically being like, well, we're not sure, we just put you here. And some people saying we've counted up your eligible experience, and we're actually doing a bit of work at the trust to try and make it more consistent where someone is put. But the only way you can do it is to ask the question. So ask your contact in human resources what pay point I'm on and why I'm on that point. Beyond that, it gets quite complicated because as long as they've got a clear contracted policy as to why they've chosen that, then you can't really argue. And it is totally acceptable, it's totally legal for them to say everybody who's never worked in the NHS before is on min. That's just the way we do things here. And if you've accepted that because you've come and chosen to work for our trust, then that's the pay that you've accepted. But if that's not written down anywhere, and if they say somewhere else that, oh, well, we would like to acknowledge your experience elsewhere, then you need to make sure that your experience is indeed acknowledged elsewhere. So it's a long rambling question, but you need to just ask the question. And if you don't get a satisfactory answer or you don't understand the answer, ask the question again and keep asking because a lot of HR staff don't understand this either, and they'll just try to fob you off. So just keep asking. And if you get really stuck, contact me and I will help you. And I will give you my email at the end / at the beginning and you can get it, but just contact me.
So there's a quick question on the chat.
Yeah.
Is stage 9 the highest scale on 2002 pay scale?
Yes.
Did you move up by stage each year on
Yes.
the 10
Exactly.
Yes.
So if you started at min, it would take you 9 years to get to 0.9. But 0.9 is the maximum. It will never go higher. So the maximum, assuming that you're not working illegal hours in one of those 2A or whatever banding jobs, the maximum salary that someone can receive is £96,432 before any deductions as a resident doctor, which is less than if you're on the 2016. Okay. So this is the current nationally agreed pay scale for doctors in training. And lots of trusts are slowly moving their locally employed doctors onto this pay scale as well. So it's equivocal between doctors doing the same jobs. But everyone in a training post will be on this. It is very complicated. And I would say picking a number out of the air, but probably like 98% of doctors in England have no freaking clue about this stuff, at least not to the level that they should. And as I mentioned, it goes wrong all the time. Just as a reminder, it goes wrong all the time. So I said it's complicated. Let's have a look at why. Well, you're paid a basic pay. Good. Then you're paid for additional hours. Then you're paid for enhanced hours. Then you're paid for weekends. Then you're paid for on-calls. Then you're paid for less than full-time allowances if you're less than full-time. Flexible pay premium and London waiting, which is the only thing that's consistent. It is stupidly complicated because each of these individual elements is calculated completely independently and separately. And if you're less than full-time, there is a whole different set of calculations that go into calculating the less than full-time component of it as well. It's nuts. And the flexible pay premium, that's just this one little inconspicuous line there, is actually 7 different elements, again, that are all calculated differently. Yeah, it's fun. The only way that you can have any clue about what you should be being paid if you're on the 2016 terms and conditions is by making sure that at the start of each job you get a work schedule. This is a contractually required document that you must receive by your HR department that sets out the scheduled duties of you and your job, including your shift pattern and your annual salary. And it must give you a breakdown of each of those individual elements for you to look at and go, I have no idea what this means. But you need to receive that document, because if you don't receive it, there's no way to ever check whether you're being paid correctly, whether you're being rotated fairly. You just can't do it. There are two types. There is a generic work schedule, and every job that is worked will have a generic work schedule for that role, which is effectively the full-time rota. And if you're full-time, generally, you'll just get given a generic work schedule and say, this is your full-time rota. You'll start somewhere on that rolling rota pattern, and you'll get paid according to that rolling rota pattern. It does mean that some people might work more nights or fewer nights or more weekends, etc., than someone else. But if you're full-time, you generally get paid according to this generic document, and it's the same for all full-time doctors in general. If you're less than full-time, you need to get a bespoke work schedule specifically for you. It's your individual unique one, and it's got your exact rota rostered onto it, and then your pay is calculated on your exact rota. And you must receive this if you're less than full-time as well. Again, otherwise there's no way to know if you're working the right number of hours, getting the right pay, etc. So again, if you're on 2016, take notes, you must receive these things. Problem with these things is sometimes you don't get them, but if you do, they sometimes look like this, or they sometimes look like this, or they sometimes look like this, or like this, and it's just an overwhelming amount of information, and it's already complicated even if it was laid out simply. So the fact they provide it in this stupid format does not help anybody. I'm aware I'm being quite inflammatory this evening. Sorry about that. But they are incredibly complex documents that are really difficult to interpret, even if you know what's going on. But the point is, even retrospectively, you can't come, for example, to me later and be like, could you check? I think I was underpaid. If you don't have that piece of paper, it's impossible to go back. So it's a contractual requirement, and it is absolutely vital for pay accuracy. You're often not given them, and they're very often inaccurate. But just as an FYI, you are contractually meant to receive one of these 8 weeks before you start a job. Just, you can chuckle at the laughability of that, but that's what you're meant to receive. If you're on the 2002, you're not meant to get one of these. It's useful to get a piece of paper that says you're rostered for this and this many hours, but it's not as contractually required as it is for the new contract. Okay, let's get into some really boring stuff. Because I'm giving you a lot of information today, and I don't think you're going to retain all of it, I'm going to whiz relatively quickly through this just so that you know it exists, but I'm not expecting you to come away knowing exactly how to calculate your pay. If you have specific questions about these pay elements, just ask me, or you can email me later. But this is more like a FYI rather than a get your pen and paper and calculate it. So your basic salary, this is the only bit that's straightforward. This is the pay for 40 hours per week. If you are a full-time doctor, you will receive at least your basic salary. It acts as the basis for most other pay elements, so it's a really important fundamental like baseline salary. But if you are receiving only this amount of money, it's because you're only working 40 hours a week, no more, and it's 9 to 5. It's basically a 9 to 5 job. This is the annual value. Can you see my mouse? I don't know if you can see my mouse. Anyway, it's pretty obvious. It's a table. That's the annual value, and that gives you your hourly rate, which I calculated for you. If you are less than full-time, you will have your hours calculated on that personal work schedule. So it might be, for example, I'm contracted for 37.25 hours a week, which means I will get 37.25 40ths of this amount of money. The next element is pay for additional hours. This is confusing, but it's not. It shouldn't be. This is pay for any work above 40 hours a week, but it's paid at exactly the same rate as that basic pay. So if you get paid if you work on a contracted for 41 hours per week, you get paid an extra 40th of your basic salary, if that makes sense. If you get paid if you're paid for 45 hours a week, you get 5/40ths of your basic salary. So it's exactly the same rate and it's proportional. But it does mean that you are paid quite literally for every hour that you work. We'll talk about why that's important beyond the obvious in a second. But just to give you some ideas, that means that every hour per week extra that you're contracted for, so if your colleagues got rostered for 41 hours a week and you're rostered for 42 hours a week, that means that per year it's a decent chunk of money. It's just an extra hour a week. So nights. Nights are paid as an addition to all of this stuff. So for every hour that you work at night, you're paid as per what I just talked about. So your basic pay and your additional hours, and you're paid the same hourly rate. You're also paid an additional rate for it being an hour at night. So if you work between 1 and 2, you get paid the basic rate of pay plus this additional nightly rate. It works out as 37% on top of the basic rate of pay. So again, I've done the maths. This is your standard hourly rate. 37% of that is a little extra. So if you are a senior neonatal registrar in a tertiary neonatal unit resuscitating a 22-weeker at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're paid an extra £12.50 an hour for the privilege of doing that. Enjoy. That's for night pay. The hours that are eligible are basically these. So it's between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. Those are all enhanced or enhanced and night are synonymous, just for more confusion. You're also paid the enhanced rate of pay for the whole shift if you hit these criteria. Basically saying these shifts are basically night shifts. So we should pay you for the little bit before and the little bit after the official night hours as well. But basically, you work at night, you get paid a bit more money. I now need to explain a really, really confusing concept. And I'm going to apologize for it in advance, but you can't understand how disastrous this is unless you understand how to actually calculate your average hours. And a lot of you will be sat there being like, we're doctors, we understand how to do basic maths. This is really confusing. So bear with me. When you get given a value that says you're contracted for 41 hours per week, that is not as simple as it may seem. Some of you may have seen something that looks a bit like this on your work schedule, maybe, where it says average hours 36. Average hours with allowance for leave, 38.3. And you may have looked at me like, I have no idea what that is. You may never have seen this before, because a lot of work schedules don't say this anywhere. I'm going to explain what this means. Brace yourself. So, you are paid based on the average intensity of an average working week. That excludes any time that theoretically you may take off as leave. So study leave, bank holidays, annual leave, any of that time is removed from the equation before they calculate your average working week hours. They must account for that before they calculate the hours on which you are paid and contracted. Because the days that we can take annual leave are usually shorter, once you remove a bunch of short days from your rota, you're left with a higher proportion of long days and night shifts. And so once you remove the short days, actually your average hours creep up. So you end up being paid at a higher rate than if you just did the basic maths. So because like none of you will have understood, probably, maybe from that, I will do a demonstration. So let's take a generic rota pattern. This is, let's say, a generic work schedule that someone will be given for a job. Don't look too closely. It's not compliance, but, it's close enough. And now let's extrapolate this over 6 months. So here is a rota that you may work as a pediatric registrar for 6 months. So if you were just to add up all of the hours and all of the shifts and then divide by the number of weeks, you would be working for 45.31 hours per week on average. And then you might be like, okay, cool, pay me for 45.31 hours a week. That would be wrong. Let's add in the leave element. So here is a full-time leave allowance for someone who's been in the NHS for a while. Let's add on 6 months worth of leave onto our 6-month rota. Suddenly you've knocked off a bunch of short days because you've taken leave on them, which means that you're now working fewer hours over the 6 months. Great. And you're like, well, that's fewer hours. Isn't my pay going to go down? The bit that you might forget is that you now need to remove those weeks that you took for leave as well. So it's not just the hours that are gone, but it's actually the whole weeks, the denominator of this equation, that are removed as well. So you're dividing a smaller number of hours, yes, but by a smaller number of weeks. And if you do that, because you've removed a lot of short days and left all the long ones, your hours go up. So you need to be paid on that higher rate. This adjustment must be done, and you must be paid on the higher rate of pay it just often goes wrong and isn't done, and you end up being paid massively under what you should. It also needs,
Dom, sorry, can I ask you a question here? Because I've been
yeah,
working very closely with compliance. I've been managing the rota for a
yeah,
while now, but I'm an LED and I know that we always send through these schedules for trainees,
yeah.
but there isn't an expectation or capacity from compliance to do this for LEDs. Hence why none of this gets calculated itemized for the LEDs. And that is again one of the places where things go wrong. But when you're calculating and you're taking off the annual leave stuff,
Yeah.
I thought they actually have to over calculate rather than under calculate the hours. Um,
How do you
sorry,
mean?
is that
So, so for compliance, you have to do the same equation. So let's say this rota actually, if you don't do the adjustment, it works out as 47 hours a week pre-adjustment. Once you do the adjustment, this may end up being like 49, 50 hours a week, which would be non-contractual. It's a
correct? Yeah. So they have
Mhm.
to take more. The leave allowance will add on to your hours rather than reduce them. Correct. Yeah.
Correct, correct. So you need to, if you're, one of the ways it goes wrong as well is if someone is just manually doing this on an Excel spreadsheet to create rotas and they just add them all up and they divide and they're like, okay, cool, I've done a rota for 47 hours a week. Um, Actually, if you were to do this equation, then they'd be working too many hours. So yeah, you need to under roster in order to be compliant. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, correct. That's usually the bosses don't understand that equation and they're like, why are we overpaying staff? But actually, it doesn't work like that. You have to take
Correct.
into account the leaves, which is a fundamental right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this must be done. And this equation must be done for the 2016 terms and conditions. And also, and I didn't say this, the 2002 terms and conditions as well, the hours you're rostered for. And remember, if you're less than full time, I said that your pay falls into those hours brackets. Those hours brackets are hours after this equation has been done. So it is very common for someone to be rostered for, you're 70%, I'm going to pay you 70%, you're working 70% hours, but if you do this equation, you get tipped up into 80% and you should be being paid for 80%. I see a hand going up. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thanks, That's really helpful. I know I'm not a pediatrician, I'm a pediatric surgeon, and we do work the 24-hour shifts. And they say to us that we are on call rota, but we are actually in the hospital. And they said that, you have been called in, but you never get paid. So I don't know. I'm a locally employed doctor, and the points which you have mentioned, it's always less for us. I'm supposed to be employed as number 5, but the pay they give you is totally different than what's happening. And I don't know whether you will mention at some point about the 24-hour rota where you don't know where to document your hours.
So I will, and actually I mainly talk about it from a 2016 terms and conditions point of view, not the 2002, which it sounds like you're on, but when I get to that point,
I
I
think I'm in the
will.
2016.
You are?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. In which case, yes, I will absolutely talk about it. Phew, because it's really convoluted for the 2002. But yes, I will absolutely talk about it for 2016. And you're right, it goes wrong a lot in exactly the way that you've mentioned. Um, so just lastly, back onto this, just to finish off, this also needs to happen for your enhanced hours, your night hours as well. Now, because you don't ever take night shifts for leave, basically, you actually have the same number of night hours pre and post adjustment. You're just dividing by the fewer number of weeks. So I'm not going to go into this in detail, but there are situations where your adjusted hours can go down and then you end up just getting paid on the pre-adjusted value. This is more than you need to know for now. But for night shifts, it will always go up. So if you do your own manual math and be like, I'm working 100 night hours over 10 weeks, that's 10 hours a week, you always need to be paid more for more than that. This is a very quick way to eyeball it. Any more questions on this leave adjustment stuff before I move on? If not, we can discuss it in more detail at the end.
Just very quickly again, this compliance business with the work schedules,
Yeah.
don't all trust and their compliance teams have a app where they have to input stuff and then it throws out this compliance, whether it is or it is not compliant, that it, you can't have more than 3 weekends in a row, you have to have all that blah 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 compliance. So why does it then go wrong? Are these compliance tools not standardized across the UK? What is it? I mean, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, this is just madness. It is just madness.
Yes, it
But
is.
what stops them unifying or making this more standardized when there are available tools?
Yeah. It's an incredibly good question, and one that I really struggled with. When I first kind of understood all this, I basically gaslit myself for about 6 months going, but it can't possibly be true. It's multifactorial, as so many things are, but some of those factors are, first of all, the compliance softwares all should be singing to the same hymn sheet. They should have the same standard calculations in them. But equally, because this stuff is so confusing, if someone releases a software and it's like, hey, I'm really good at doing this, no one checks it because no one really understands it. So there have been incidences in the past where, and can I say this? Yeah, I've been responsible for reviewing some of the softwares and gone, you're doing your compliance wrong. Like your maths is fundamentally incorrect and no one else can manually check it. So it's just wrong. So that's the first way. The second way is even if they are perfect, the math is all correct, the user guidance is often very bad. So I make this wonderful bit of software and then I give it to Mr. Smith in HR, and Mr. Smith goes, I can use a bit of software. I don't need to understand any of this. I'm just going to put in the numbers and it'll spit out the answer. But they don't understand that actually you have to put in the right things to get the right answers out. So they may, for example, forget that you are entitled to bank holidays, or forget that you're entitled to a study leave allowance, or in some cases just forget that you're entitled to leave at all. There's a lot of complexity that goes into this actual equation. I've simplified it, but it's quite nuanced. And for example, even the length of your standard short day shift affects this calculation. And so a lot of places may work a 9-hour shift, for example, as their standard, but the HR person will go, oh, 8 hours is the usual standard, I'll put in 8 hours, and then it will go wrong. Some of the software I've seen, the way that you define a standard day is incredibly confusing and it doesn't make any sense. And so you've got to know how to almost manipulate the software to get you the right answer. So all of this stuff, it can go wrong in that way. And the third way it can go wrong, particularly for locally employed doctors who aren't given this contractually required work schedule, or for 2016 contracted doctors who just don't receive it, is HR think, oh, it's all compliant, it's all fine. I've got some document that says that they only employ doctors in this way. But the guy that actually does the rota for you and gives you your Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that says you're working these shifts hasn't spoken to HR. They're like, oh, HR thinks it's compliant. I think I'm working on what HR thinks we've got. We'll just fudge it. And it's completely different. And because you don't have the thing that you can look and I've got my HR document that says my hours and my pay. I've got my salary. I can compare the two. You don't have those two things, and so you can't check. Does that answer your question / fill you with dread?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Dom.
Sorry. Okay, weekends. Let's move on before well, I don't know what before. Barbara, I'm relying on you to keep an eye out for questions in the chat that I can answer at the time, but we'll keep
No
on.
worries.
Weekend allowance. This is determined by your weekend frequency, not the number of weekend shifts that you work, where a worked weekend is a weekend where you have any number of shifts or any number of hours where the shift starts on a Saturday or a Sunday. So that means that if you work 1 hour, this is a farcical example, but if you work 1 hour on a Saturday, that counts as a worked weekend. If you work 48 hours over the weekend, that counts as a single worked weekend. It also means that if you start a night shift on a Friday night and finish it on a Saturday at 10 a.m., that does not count as a worked weekend because it does not start on a Saturday or Sunday. That horrible caveat in mind, the pay if you're full-time is pretty straightforward. You work out your weekend frequency, i.e. the number of worked weekends over your rota, and then you get paid a percentage uplift of your basic pay. Remember that I said the basic pay is a kind of the building block of many of the additional elements, so this is one of them. So if you work 1 in 3 weekends, like so many of us do, you get paid a 10% uplift on your basic salary. So if you did the math, you'll see that these are all 10% of your basic salary. If you work 1 in 4.3 weekends, you get a 6% uplift in your basic salary. That's relatively straightforward. if you're less than full-time, it gets confusing. If you remember my first poster when I was young and naive and thought it's always correct, the less than full-time weekends was the first thing that made me realize, oh God, this is all wrong. So if you're less than full-time, it's not determined by your weekend frequency that you actually work as a less than full-time doctor. That would be too simple. No. It is determined by the pro rata proportion of weekends that you work compared to your full-time colleague, and then you get a pro-rated amount of their weekend allowance. This is confusing, I will explain it. But basically, it's irrelevant what your less than full-time percentage is, and it's irrelevant how many weekend hours you do. For example, here is a rota, a full-time rota with the Saturdays and Sundays filled in and everything else ignored because no one cares for this. I'm a less than full-time doctor, and I come on and I go, I'm working 60% less than full-time, so I'm going to only work 60% of the weekend shift. We're not talking about rostering today, but this is what should happen. So I'm going to go along and be like, not going to work this one, not going to work this one. I'm going to take off the weekend shifts that I'm not going to work. Done. This is correct from a rota and compliance point of view. For a pay point of view, I'm actually working 8 of the weekends that my full-time colleague is working, because you're working this one, 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 this one. It's only the last 2 that you're not actually working. So even though you're working fewer shifts and fewer hours on some of these weekends, it still counts as a worked weekend. So you're working 80%. You get paid 80% of the full-time allowance. Hope that's clear. Right, on calls. Now, I was going to brush over this and be like, in general, pediatricians don't tend to do many on-calls. And by on-calls terminology, this means non-resident on-calls, which is where you are meant to be non-resident, not on-site. You're at home somewhere else, and you may get called into hospital. So there are 2 elements to this. The first element is that if you work any non-resident on-call shifts, if you work 1 or you work 50, you get an 8% uplift to your basic pay. That is fixed. So if literally I work 1 non-resident on-call shift a year and my pal over here works a non-resident on-call every single week, I get paid 8% more, they get paid 8% more. The intensity of those on-calls and how many hours you actually work is reflected in the standard ways that we are normally paid. So if you work lots of hours, you get your average weekly hours goes up and you get paid more. If you work lots of non-resident on-call hours at night, your enhanced hours goes up and you get paid more. That's how it's reflected. So this is fair enough. So this on-call availability allowance is a supplement for the inconvenience, that's my own phrase, of having to work non-resident on-call shifts. It's irrelevant how many actual hours you work. That is accounted for in the average weekly hours, average enhanced hours. And that is determined in advance. So if I'm designing your rota, if I'm in HR and I'm designing your rota, I will be like, okay, non-resident on-call shifts here. I have to have an idea in my head how many expected standard hours and enhanced hours my doctor is expected to work for that shift, and I will pay them for it. So I'll say, on a Sunday 24-hour shift, you probably work 8 hours during the day and 3 hours at night. That's probably about right. I'm going to pay you for 8 hours in the day and 3 hours at night. You're only paid for the hours that you are predicted to be working. If you work less than that, you just don't get woken up at all overnight. You still get paid for those hours. If you're working more than this, then you need to exception report. In fact, you must exception report because it's the only feedback tool that can go back to the trust and the managers to go, we need to readjust these hours. So it's not a like, oh, I can't exception report. You must exception report and you must tell people, and this is the way to tell people, that you're working more than anticipated. I will also say that if you're working a non-resident on-call shift, that is non-resident, and the contract is very clear that says if you are required to be on site, it is not a non-resident on-call shift, and it must count as a resident on-call shift and be paid for and interpreted in that way, if that makes sense. So if you have to be on site, you're doing work all night, then you need to readjust how this is done. Again, like, I'm not here to tell you how to pick battles with HR. That's a whole other talk, but that is what must happen. If you're less than full-time, again, it's slightly different, but it's slightly more straightforward. You are paid pro rata based on the number of shifts you work compared to full-time. So if my full-time pal over here works 10 on-call shifts and I work 5 on-call shifts, I get paid 50% of the supplement that they receive. Again, it's not based on your less than full-time percentage. We're almost there. The last little bits of the pay scale is some additional bits. So if you're less than full-time, you get paid £1,000 per year fixed rate. If you work 90% less than full-time, you get £1,000. If you work 20% less than full-time, it's £1,000. It's fixed. If you work 99% less than full-time, not that that exists, but I'm, proving a point, it's £1,000. And this is basically to represent the fact, dubiously, that if you're full-time, you still need to pay full GMC registration, full stethoscope fees, all of these extra things. And so it's like a little extra supplement for that. If you're in London, you get London waiting. These haven't been increased for like 50 odd years. So, it doesn't pay for a sandwich, but this is the London waiting. Inner, outer, and fringe is vague and confusing boundaries depending on where you are in London. But basically, if you're in central London, it's inner. If you're kind of out by the M25, it's outer. And if you're way out, it's fringe. And then if you have done a higher academic degree, so you've gone and done an MD or a PhD while in training, you've taken an OOP-R, an outer program to do this thing, and then come back into training, you should receive an extra £8,500 per year for having done that thing, acknowledging that it's going to take you longer to get through training. If you're less than full-time, oh God, I didn't even talk. If you're less than full-time, the London waiting is based pro rata based on your 40 hours a weekness. So again, I'm 70%, but I'm contracted for 37.25 hours a week, which means I get 37.25 40ths of the London waiting. The academic pay premium is based on your less than full-time percentage. So I'm 70%, I would get 70% of that value. I told you it was confusing. We're all mostly pediatricians here, but if you are any of these specialties, then you also get this extra supplement. I won't dwell too much on that. All of this stuff is pro rata to your less than full-time percentage if you happen to be less than full-time.
Sorry, Dom, the academic additional pay element that you just mentioned in the previous slide,
Yeah.
does that only apply to trainees or to LEDs as well?
That depends on your contract. So I should have a card that I hold up every time I get asked about locally employed doctors. I don't know, because you genuinely are an employee going to an employer asking them to give you a job, and they can pay you whatever the hell they want.
Whatever they want, yeah.
So it's
Okay.
really important to get a contract and have a look at it. And a lot of places are genuinely trying to mirror the trainees' contract.
Trainees, yeah.
But equally, if you've done this thing and they're not going to give you an academic pay premium, you could be like, well, shouldn't I be on a higher nodal point because I add value to your department? I'm a boom. So, but it's all the discussion.
But then if you're already on the highest nodal point, where do you go from there? Yeah, there's only thank you.
Yeah. Pay uplifts. Oh my God, there are so many questions. Okay, fine. Any questions that I should answer now? Or
No, you're fine. Nadia was asking if you could answering questions, but it was about
amazing.
reporting applied to LED contract doctors, but
awesome.
Nadia managed to answer. Thank you.
Right, pay uplifts. I'm touching on this because it's a cause of confusion for doctors that have worked in the NHS for like 20 years, as well as people who've worked here for a week. So you're not alone. Basically, every year, we are public sector workers, and each year our pay should kind of go up along with inflation. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does, but inflation is going up. So our salary should go up. The exact value of this pay rise each year is government mandated, and it was the cause of the recent strike action. So we were in official dispute with the government for like the last year and a half, which ended back in November because we were like, we want more money. And they said no. And then eventually they said, okay, have a little bit. But basically, even if you take all of that aggro out of the situation, our pay should go up each year. Recently, because of strikes and because the government didn't want to give us any money and because lots of factors, these pay uplifts have come into effect retrospectively. So normally, in the UK, the tax year runs April to April. So in general, these things take effect in April. Normally what should happen is you trundle along March, you're paid this much, April, oh, you're paid a bit more, lovely. And then you keep going on your higher pay scale. in recent years, these have come into effect retrospectively. So March paid something, April the same, June, July, always the same. Then they go, okay, fine. Actually, we're going to give you a pay rise, and we're going to backdate it to April, meaning that your salary needs to be recalculated onto what it would have been had it been at that higher pay scale in April, and then you get paid a bunch of back pay to make up the deficit, and then your pay goes up for future terms. So in the 2024 uplift, if you worked in the UK in November 2024, you will have received a pay uplift and some back pay. And this is crazy complicated, and I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but going back, take your mind back to April 2023. We received a pay uplift at the right time. It was all lovely and as it should have been. So March paid something, April, oh yeah, a little pay uplift. Cool, carry on. Then actually in September, in September, they said, okay, we're going to pay you a bit more as of back in April. And so they introduced a retrospective pay uplift that was backdated to April 2023, and it came into effect in September. So everyone got a few months of back pay and your pay went up. Then we all went on strike and all got angry, and April 2024 came around and nothing happened because we were in dispute. And then after lots of strike action, eventually the government said, okay, fine, we're going to give you a pay uplift, and we're going to increase the pay uplift that you should have received back in April 2023 by a few more percentage points. So even though we all already got a pay uplift for April 23, they made it an even bigger pay uplift for 2023. So everyone got a pay uplift between April 23 and April 24. But then they also gave us a pay uplift from April 24 onwards. So you got a bit of a bump from April 23 to April 24, and then another bump from April 24 up to November. And all of that was back pay. So everybody got a big, healthy bunch of money in their bank accounts to equate for a year and a half of back pay. And then their salary was increased. Just for interest, this uplifted pay only affects basic pay and the elements that are derived from basic pay, so additional hours, night hours, weekend allowance, on-call allowances, and also they increase some of the flexible pay premium as well. The London waiting and the less than full-time allowance were not increased. Now, you may or may not have seen in the news, but the government is kindly giving us a woefully inadequate, but they are still giving us a small pay rise. Again, they're going to backdate it to April 25, and it's likely to come into effect in August, which means in August, all of our salaries will go up, but we will also receive back pay back to April 2025. Again, the same things are uplifted. Now, I anticipate that there's lots of people asking in the chat whether if you're on the 2002 or 2016, you get these things. Good news is this applies to all of both of those pay scales. So if you're on 2002 or the 2016, you will see this money. It's ever so slightly different in how it's given, but you will see this money. It's more or less the same proportion.
Tom, what would you do, or what would you suggest to people who don't work anymore in the same hospital where they used to work? Will they get money from the current trust or the previous trust? And if they will get from the previous trust, how will they even get in touch with them?
Great question. And I wasn't going to touch on that, so thank you for asking. So the trust that you were working for at the time that this would have happened is responsible for paying you. So if you left a trust in, let's say you work in London and you leave your London trust now in June 2025, and then you go to the Midlands, and the Midlands are paying you. When this uplift retrospectively comes back in, the London trust that employed you for April, May, June is responsible for paying you that extra money. It should happen automatically. They have a legal responsibility to pay you that money. Of course they don't. And in fact, with the last uplifts, a lot of trusts, I can't believe they even did this, but they literally got in touch. They literally said, when people asked them, how am I going to get this money? They said, yeah, we're not going to give it to you automatically. You have to email us and specifically request it. That is not allowed. That is not legal. They have to pay you this money, but they tried to get away with it. I am so inflammatory. Is this really going to be recorded? Oh, well. But that's what happened.
Don't worry, we'll pay for you.
That's quite literally what happened. Some places did it intentionally, some places did it accidentally, and some places just did it delayed, and if you had left, then they would pay you 1 month, 2 months, 3 months later than they should have done. But it is the trust that you're working for at the time that is responsible for paying you that money.
So should we email HR?
Email HR and then email them again and then keep emailing until you get a response.
But would
I
they give a direct payout, or would they go through the current trust that they're working and they
No,
have to
direct.
do a direct
They have to do it
payment into your bank
directly.
account?
The trust that
Okay.
you're working for, if it's a new trust, they have no skin in this game. They have no obligation to be involved in this. They have to pay you for anything where you're working for them, but it's got nothing to do with them. So they have to pay you directly, and it's not actually hard to do. And the systems in the back end are kind of designed to do this. It's just work, and people don't want to. I'm not going to say anything. Let's move on. So the other big question is, which I thought you were going to ask, is how much should I get paid? And it's complicated, and I will help you with this to some extent. But basically, what you need to do theoretically is determine what your new salary would have been if it had been calculated with all those factors based on the new uplifted pay scale values. Then you work out what the difference would have been. But you need to work out the monthly difference. So if the whole of June, let's say, well, that's easy. My monthly pay would have been this, and then my new monthly pay would have been this, so I'm owed this difference. But for part months, so if you changed jobs or you only worked, you stopped working for them on the 26th of the month, then you need to work out actually how much each day is valued for that job. And that gets confusing because months have different lengths, and you have to prorate it depending on the number of days in the month, and it's all kind of confusing. And then you have to work out exactly the difference in the months and the part months.
Can I
and
just
deduction.
ask quick? I'm really sorry, just because we are jumping from one topic to another. There's at least one question I can ask you from the chat. So the question is, so if I get you correctly, the yearly pay uplift doesn't necessarily come in exactly after a year. It can be delayed and then paid back.
Is that, you may not know if this is in the chat, let me have a look. If you're talking about the 2002 contract where each year you move up the pay scale, that happens at somewhere called your increment date, which is a date personal to you, and exactly on that date each year it will go up. If you're talking about the pay uplifts that we receive kind of from the government mandated pay rises, then they should, in theory, come in each April, on the 1st of April each year. But if they don't, then they will come in whenever the government gets around to telling us it's going to come in, and then they pay back to April, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. So we are running late, but that's okay because we've only got tax and then we've got actual pay slips, which are actually not that complicated. But the thing I'll say is we're now moving. Remember, I said to keep those two different ways that pay can go wrong in mind. We've done the biggest one. All of that calculation of what your actual salary is the big thing that can go wrong. Tax does go wrong and is really confusing, but in general, it's not actually that big a deal, even though it's much scarier than people think. So very whistle-stop tour of what's known as PAYE, pay as you earn, also known as just income tax. This is a tax that the government takes. So every time you get paid, the government takes their proportion of your salary as income tax. You only get taxed on your taxable pay, which is basically everything you get minus any pension contributions that you have. And it's paid according to this, it's taken from you according to this table. So everyone gets something called a personal allowance, which is an amount that they are able to earn before they pay any income tax. So everyone can earn up to £12,500 before you pay any income tax. Above that, and up to £50,000, you pay 20%. Now that is 20% on £12,000 to £50,000. So you still have that amount as tax-free. That's all yours. The 20% deduction is only on the next chunk of money. So if you earn £13,000, let's say, you're not taxed 20% on £13,000, you're taxed 20% on £500. The same thing happens again if you earn above £50,000, up to money that we're not earning as doctors, at least not resident doctors, then you pay 40% tax on that. Above £100,000, I don't mention here, but your personal allowance does start to get chipped away at and starts to get reduced. But that's beyond the scope of this talk. Also, if you happen to do some self-employed work, let's say you have like a side business or you have a shop where you do some tutoring or something and you get paid, you're allowed something called a trading allowance, which the first £1,000 of income that you earn as a self-employed person on top of your normal job is tax-free. So let's say you go and do some tutoring on top of your normal NHS job and you earn £500 a year from that, that's tax-free. You don't have to mention it. All of this stuff is determined by your tax code. When you see your tax code, that hateful little numbers and letters in your payslip that you don't understand what it means, that is just informing this. That's all it is. And we're not going to go into too much detail about tax codes because it's often wrong. That's the first line. But hold that thought. The reason it's often wrong is because standard tax code should be this, generally. 1257L cumul. Now, what that refers to is this, 1257. It's your personal allowance. So what's that saying is that is your standard personal allowance. You've got the standard personal allowance that everyone else should have. L, I forget what L means. Oh, it means that you just get the standard personal allowance. And then cum means cumulative, which means that each month you work, the tax is calculated taking into account the amount of tax that you've already paid this tax year. You don't need to know this, and I would advise that you don't worry too much about this. The reason it goes wrong is every time you change employer, which happens quite a lot for doctors, particularly rotational doctors, one employer is meant to tell the other employer, hey, this is all of their tax stuff, and they're meant to tell HMRC, they've stopped working for us. But these things don't happen. They don't happen quickly, which means that when you start in a new employer, the employer goes, oh, I don't know what you're meant to be taxing you at. So they just make something up, and they usually put you on something called an emergency tax code, which is something you may have heard people talking about, which is basically going, we don't know, we're going to guess, and then we'll work it out later. If you want to know more about what specific tax codes means, go and look at this website. It's particularly good if you have insomnia and you want to get to sleep. The reason I say that I wouldn't worry too much about this is it will generally work itself out. The benefit of this being government mandated, you know, they just take your money before you even see it tax stuff, is they have a record of all of this. So you pay way too much tax in a couple of months. You're like, oh my God, where's my money gone? And you're like, I must do something about this. What will actually happen is at the end of the tax year, slowly the government algorithm will do its thing and will calculate exactly what you earned and exactly what you should have paid in tax and exactly what you did pay in tax and work out if it was right or not. And it's usually wrong. And then what they do is they adjust your tax-free allowance to make up the deficit. So
Sorry,
if
Dom, can I just say something here
yeah,
in terms of this emergency tax code?
yeah,
It is not as naive as it sounds because there's been many times when we're changing trust, and if I've been part-time, I literally have got like £720 of my whole pay, and then
yes,
I make all these calls and then find out, oh, actually, because you're on an emergency tax code, that's why you're getting this ridiculous amount. So it does make a whole lot of a difference if you've got a mortgage and if you've got bills to pay.
it
It
does.
it absolutely messes the whole thing. So I think it should be illegal for them to do this. Absolutely.
You're absolutely right. And the really killer tax code is D0, which is basically the one that says everything you earn is going to get taxed at 40%. So if you go back to this, normally, even if you're in the 40% tax bracket, everything below 50,000 is still taxed at way less than that. So that's the real killer. And you're absolutely right that you need to do something about this, and it's actually pretty easy what to do, and I will get there. But the main reason I say, well, as long as you don't need the money right then and there, and I'm aware that a lot of people do need the money, particularly if you get stung with an emergency tax code of 40%, HMRC will adjust your tax code so that they give you more tax-free allowance or less tax-free allowance so that you're paying slightly more or slightly less tax. So it works itself out eventually. If they calculate that actually you paid way too much tax, we owe you like £3,000, and they're not going to be able to adjust it by twiddling your tax, your personal allowance, they'll just pay you a lump sum of money. There is an easier way to fix this if you are being really badly hit by this. The first thing is call HMRC, which sounds really painful, but actually they're really good on the phone. If you can bear with the 40-minute hold time, generally they're excellent, really kind people that care and understand this stuff and will fix it like that for you. So if you're like, I don't work at Croydon, I now work at St. Helier, please can you make St. Helier my primary employment? They will fix your tax code then and there. You can also, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this in a second, get a government tax account, which I would advise you all to do. I'll explain what to do, which means that you can go in and see exactly what you're being taxed at. And if they owe you money, you can click a button that's like, pay me my money now. And they'll just pay it to you, which is nice. Okay, everyone who is falling asleep, sit up and take note. This will save you money. Like literally will save you money. It's free money. If you don't claim tax relief for professional expenses, this is literally free money. So we are entitled to not have to pay tax on things that we have to do for our job. So for example, Royal College fees, GMC fees, exam fees is a bit contentious, but I'm putting it in there because some people can claim it. Union fees, medical indemnity fees, equipment that you have to use at work that isn't provided for you by your work, all of this stuff, you shouldn't have to pay tax on it. And so you can tell the government that you're spending this money and they will give you that money back, which is great. And it works out, depending on your expenditure, on quite a lot of money. If you're sat there being like, oh my God, I haven't been doing this, I've been here for like 4 years, you can claim for the current year and 4 years previous. So if you're sat there going, oh my God, I haven't done this for the last 4 years, you are about to have a massive pay bump. You are welcome. The best part is, as long as your fees roughly remain the same, you only need to do it once unless these annual expenses change significantly. Because what happens is the government goes, okay, well, you have £1,000 of additional expenses, so we're just going to increase your tax-free allowance by £1,000 to adjust for it. Done. You never have to do it again. And as I say, it's free money. Please do it. And how do you do it? I hear you clamour.
And Dom, just one more thing is, when you work for the same trust on bank shifts, that gets created as a second job rather than the first job. And that again messes up your tax code because that you then have two tax codes.
Correct. And it's variable. Some employers will put it in the same job, but most will make it as a second job. So it looks like you've got two employers. Usually what should happen is you have your normal job and then you get taxed at 40% on everything on the locum rate, because actually everything on the locum rate, or is assuming you're in the 40% tax bracket, everything at that rate, it should be taxed at 40%. So that should be correct. But yes, you're right, it's just another way that things can go wrong. So I'm happy to share these slides if that's a thing that people find useful, particularly with these URLs. But basically, if you Google UK government personal tax account, it will take you to this website and you can create a personal tax account. It's really useful, even though it's incredibly dull, because you can see the listed employers that you've got. So it can see that some place I worked for 3 years ago has still technically got me on payroll. And then you can go to this website, Tax Relief for Employees, and you can just do an online portal. It's a bit confusing, but it's not as bad as it could be. And you just fill in a bunch of details. In theory, you can do it by the post. They had a weird bit about a year ago where they made it mandatory to do it by post. Luckily, they've gone back to the online portal because that was awful. But basically, you can do it all online now, unless you're claiming for less than. That is wrong. Should be more than £2,500 a year or for more than 5 employers. Oh wait, no, if it's less than 2.5. I did have engaged my brain. If it's less than 2.5 grand, or it's from fewer than 5 employers, then you can do it all online. If it's more than that, then you need to do it on paper, and then they just send you a load of money, and they're like, yeah, great, here's the tax back on all of this stuff.
Dom, quick question. Do we have to send in all the receipts or evidence for the tax relief? How does it work?
They can ask for evidence. So when I did it, I put in a bunch of stuff and they didn't ask me for anything. They're just like, yep, seems legit, off you go. Obviously, if you are lying, that is tax fraud, and don't commit tax fraud. But in theory, they can just ask you and they can be like, send us everything. They will also sometimes question these things, and particularly, you know, I talked about exams being a bit contentious, and some of these things they'll come back to you and be like, "Sorry, what is this thing? And are you sure? And is it really essential for your job?" And you might have a bit of a discussion, and they might say, "We're not accepting that." But you don't always have to send stuff in, but they may ask you, and they may question things.
Yeah, someone's just written in the chat that they have started asking for receipts now.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I said I did it a while ago, so that's actually useful information for me. Thank you. And it's reasonable. Generally, if you paid for something like the BMA or GMC or something, and you've not got a receipt, you could probably just ask them, be like, "Hey, could I have an invoice?" I'm sure that's a reasonable thing that they will accommodate, maybe. I'm going to whiz through national insurance because basically it's just another tax. It was actually historically set up to pay for the NHS, but now it just is another tax. It's paid slightly differently in that it drops the more you earn. So for the first chunk of money, you pay 8%, and then after £4,000 a month, it drops down to 2% on top of that. You generally don't need to worry about this. It's fine. The only situation in which you might need to worry is if you do a lot of locums at a lot of different hospitals. In that situation, just contact me after class and we will talk, and I will skip over this slide because it's boring and very, very niche. 2 minutes on pensions and then payslips and then some tips and then we're done. Sorry, it's late. NHS pension. Okay. No one understands the pension. I'm going to explain it and then I'm going to tell you whether you should or should not be in it. You will all if you're in the pension scheme, you will all have pensionable pay. That is your basic pay and your London weighting. That's true on the 2002, that's true on the 2016. All of those additional elements and everything, they're not pensionable. So only your basic pay and London weighting is pensionable. And basically, to be in the scheme, there is a cost, and the cost is this percentage of your pensionable pay. So the more you earn, not only the more you pay because you're earning more, but also you pay a bigger proportion of your pay slip not into the scheme as a cost of being a subscriber to the scheme. So if you're in the scheme and you earn over 60k, 62k as pensionable pay, then you pay 12.5% of all of that into the pension for pension. If you're less than full time, it's all pro rata. So if let's say you earn 70,000 pounds and you're 50% and you earn 35,000 pounds, then you're in the bracket that only pays 9.8%. So that's the cost of being in the scheme. What is confusing and what no one understands is that you're not paying it into a pot, you're not putting it into a bank vault waiting for you. What you pay in each month has no bearing on what you get out. The money that you pay each month is just a subscription fee. You're signing up to a subscription. It's irrelevant to the pension that you're going to receive at the end of the day.
Dom, that's horrifying to hear.
It's actually not as bad as you think. It's more confusing than horrifying. Because it's a bit horrifying. But the money's not going into an account for you. It's literally just a subscription fee. And what you're getting for that subscription, because there is value to it, there's good value to it, is a service. And the service is basically the government promising to pay you a pension when you retire. And the value of that pension that they will pay you when you retire is 1/54th of each year's pensionable pay. So there is some proportionality in that the more you earn, the higher your pension will pay, the higher your pension will be, but it's not actually related to the exact amount of money that leaves your account, if that makes sense. So I will give you an example.
Is it almost like potluck, but you'll get it all after you retire?
How do you mean?
Well, you're paying a set amount every month till you retire, and then you get your potluck at the end.
Yeah. You get an amount, you get a salary basically when you retire, and that salary is the pension. And I will tell you how this is calculated. Oh, Barbara, hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to interrupt very politely.
Mm.
Ask you how long you think you're going to continue for tonight, just because I can see running out of time. I mean, I can stay here forever, and I guess many of the audience can stay here forever because what you're saying is just so interesting and it's probably so new to us. But I was wondering if we can maybe do a jump to the payslip and then continue in a second part with everything that you have not finished today, or your option is finish everything in the next 15 minutes. What do you think?
Oh, I'll be done in 15 minutes. I have
then
two.
we will have all the questions and answers that probably people.
Oh, I've got 2 slides until payslips. So let's do payslips and we can take stock.
Perfect. Let's do that then.
Lovely. I will do this slide just to explain, and this is my last slide before payslips.
Sorry, can I just jump in? So we'll have,
Yeah.
will we have a hard stop at 9:45? Or do you want to run?
I'm good.
We're happy to run on until people have exhausted.
I'm happy.
I think it would lend itself to another session.
Yeah.
But if you're happy to run on, I think we could let the session run till 10 at the latest, and I think then close it by 10 if not before. So that should hopefully be long enough.
Nadia, I'm happy to stay on longer, so it's fine. I know you have to wake up early.
It's fine. I just I think your audience will be very keen to ask you many questions. So, but I just also am mindful of your time, because you obviously now with Doctor's Paycheck, that's something that's potentially generating income, but it's also your time, and you're doing it to help people.
That's right. Let's do payslips, because actually pensions, we can it's a very broad brush, and we can talk about pensions later. The only thing I'll say about pensions is if you're going to be in the UK for a decent amount of time, it's a really good pension scheme, and it's actually pretty good value for money. If you're not, and you have no intention of being here long term, then this is not financial advice, but it's probably not worth it, and you can opt out. And we can talk about that later, but you can opt out of it. Payslips. This is a payslip. It is a confusing document that you should get and you should have a record of and you should try to hold on to. I know that some people wanted to know how to know whether they're paid on the 2002 or the 2016, and you can tell based on your payslip. You should have a contract and you should look at your contract and it will say how you're paid. But if you're not sure, you can look at your payslip. If it says band, if it just says basic pay or London zone, then actually you could be either. But if it says banding, that is 2002. If it has any weird other elements that aren't just basic or London, any of this other stuff, you are 2016. So the band is only 2002, and any of this other funky stuff is only 2016. So with that in mind, let us talk through the anatomy of a payslip. There are 4 different unique sections, and just think of the 4 as separate standalone bits. There's a bit about you and your job and your employer. There's the money that comes in, so what we call gross pay, but basically the money that the employer is paying you as a salary. There is the money that then they take away again as your taxes and deductions. And then at the bottom, there is a summary of stuff. The most important bit by far is the money in section. That's the bit where you're going to spot mistakes. So we'll quickly whiz through this and what this all means. The stuff in red is not very interesting. It's things like the name of your employer and your name, where you work, your national insurance number, which is a useful record, and your tax office details, which is really useful if you ever call HMRC. They will want to know about the tax office name and the tax office reference. So that's worth knowing if you're going to speak to HMRC, but it will be the same for each employer. The only thing that's relevant for 2002 employed doctors is the increment date. Remember I talked about you go up each calendar year. Every time the Earth revolves around the sun, it goes up by 1. Your increment date should be written here clearly on your payslip if you're on the 2002. If you're on 2016, that will be blank. It's not relevant. Your assignment number has many names. It could be called your payroll number, your assignment number, your employee number. This is a unique number for that employment for you, that if you ever speak to payroll, they'd be like, what's your employee number? And that's what that means. If you have lots of instances of jobs in a single trust, they will just add on a dash 1, 2, 3, 4 to the end each time you have it. So if I've been back to the same place a bunch of times, I'll have blah, 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 dash 7 or something. The pay scale used will basically say your grade. So if you're on the ST6 to 8 pay scale, it'll say XT6 to 8. Your average weekly hours, if you're full-time, this will always be 40 because the extra stuff is only counted as additional hours. It's not included in this about you bit, although you are paid for it. Full-time, it'll always say 40. If you're less than full-time, this will be your calculated average weekly hours after that adjustment we talked about. Your sal/wage is basically the basic pay scale for your point. So if you are on 2002, it'll be your point on that track. And if you're on 2016, it'll be your nodal pay point based on your grade. And then your PT sal wage is, if you're full-time, the same. And if you're part-time, it is the pro rata amount. So the how many 40ths you get.
Okay.
So that's the about you section. It's not very interesting. I don't look at it very often. Oh, your tax code. That's useful to know about as well. That's where that lives. I'm sure you know that. The money in bit is really important. And all I really need to tell you is just look at it. So I will tell you what it means so you can then forget about it, but just look. So the main bit is, are they paying you each of the elements that you're expecting to being paid? Beyond that, you can ignore the 3 columns in the middle. They're kind of confusing. I will tell you what they are, and then you can forget about them. Basically, the week earned is the number of hours worked that month for each pay element. So if you look at basic pay, if you multiply 40 by the number of weeks in a month, which is 4.345, that is 173.81. That's all that is doing there. So again, for night hours, it'll be your night hours per week multiplied by 4.345. That's all that is. You can now forget about it. Some elements like weekends aren't paid hourly, so they don't have a value there. The paid due is the number of hours worth of basic pay. So for basic pay, London waiting, things that are at their fixed rate, it's the same. For night duty, you will note that this number is 37% of this number because you're being paid for 53 hours a week of night pay, a month of night pay. So you get paid 37% of that as basic pay. The rate is just the hourly rate for that job, that role. It's derived from your annual salary. It's very boring. And then the only other thing to look at is the last bit. So ignore the 3 middle ones, just look at the first column and the last column. This is the amount they're paying for each of these elements. These amounts should be exactly 1/12 of the amount on your work schedule. So if you're on 2016, it should be 1/12 of the amount. If you only work part of a month, so let's say you work 20 out of 30 days in a month, it will be 20/30ths of 1/12 of that annual salary amount, if that makes sense. So that's worth checking, comparing your work schedule and going, is this actually 1/12 of what it says on my work schedule? Am I being paid the right amount? Because if you are, great, and if you're not, you need to tell them straight away. And also, it seems like a bit of a joke to be like, just check that you're being paid for weekends and nights and stuff, but I have seen so many people just not be paid for nights or not be paid for weekends, even though they should be. That's that bit done. This is just all the things that come out again before the money lands in your pocket. So PAYE is just your income tax. It's going to happen. There's no avoiding it. Death and taxes. NIA is National Insurance Class A. Most people are Class A. Again, don't worry too much if it has a different letter. There are some niche situations and some not that niche situations like being married, which make it slightly different. But generally, it's all kind of the same. And again, it just happens. Don't worry too much about it. Your NHS pension, if you were a subscriber to the scheme, will be here. Don't worry too much about the amount that goes out. Just worry that the percentage there, it relates to this table. So if your pension will pay, remember that's your basic pay and your London waiting. Wherever it falls, that should be your percentage. I've seen people who should be paying 9.8%, but it says 12.5% here, and they are losing more money. And remember, the amount you pay has no bearing on what you receive. So they'll get their pension based on their pensionable pay, not on this percentage. And so that if they pay more, they don't get more. So just check that that's correct. And then there'll be all the other deductions. So student loans, mess fees, car parking, salary sacrifice, anything else will appear here, and that's a deduction. And then finally, your summary will be here. So in general, this is a lovely summary of everything that's happened in that tax year. The problem is each employer is an island. So if you've moved employer in the tax year, they won't know what happened in a previous employer. So that makes this just kind of useless. And honestly, I never look at this section. It's really unhelpful unless you've got a consistent job and you're vaguely interested. But basically, this left-hand bit is the yearly summary cumulative totals of the amount of national insurance tax, income tax, pension that you've paid for this tax year for this employment. This right-hand bit is the monthly summary. So it will say, it's quite useful if you're looking at lots of pay slips. This will say, it'll say monthly if it's a monthly pay slip. If you do locums, it'll say weekly. It'll say the period. So if you want to see like, where's my June pay slip? It'll say June there. That's useful. It will say the dates that you're paid. So that's vaguely useful. And then it will give you a breakdown of what is pensionable pay, what is taxable pay, and we've explained that. So pensionable pay is just basic plus London weighting. Taxable pay is everything minus pension. And if you receive like study funding and things like that, that's not taxed, so that won't be included in your taxable pay. And then your net pay, that's the figure that anyone cares about. That's your actual what lands in my pocket. Okay, I have some stuff on common errors, but it could easily be a whole talk in itself. So I will just end with a very quick summary of saying, if you take nothing away from this talk, what I would like you to take away from is sleepless nights, about how wrong it goes. And then if you're on the 2016, make sure you get a work schedule and check that it matches the rota you're actually doing, because that's so easy to do. If you're on the 2002, just check that HR have got the right hours for what you should be working. Check that each element of your pay is calculated correctly. So check that your salary calculation as provided to you by HR is correct. If you're on 2002, check why you're on the point that you're on. If you're on the 2016, consider using doctor's paycheck or consider just working through to check each calculation. Look at your pay slips. Make sure that every element appears on it and that the monthly values are related to what your employer is saying you should be getting. And just some very quick money saving tips. I can send these around, so don't worry too much about the looking at the QR codes. But if you're less than full time, this will give you some discounts. Don't forget to claim back tax for professional expenses. If you want to opt out of pension, if that's the right thing for you, then you can opt out using this link. And don't worry too much about deferring national insurance. So you can take a picture of this. We can share the slides later. I don't really mind, but I will end it there. And if you do want to get in touch with me, just email info@doctorspaycheck.com or dom@doctorspaycheck.com. That will come straight to me. And this QR code will take you to our site. Hopefully, I haven't checked it. And if you do want to sign up, then we've got a discount code. It's full price. It's £36 a year, but 20% off for soft landings. That will be valid until the end of next week, so next Wednesday. Done.
Dom,
Sorry, I massively overran. Come at me with your questions.
you're a legend, honestly. What's the name of that guy? Martin Lewis? He's
Not
nothing compared to you.
very,
Honestly,
very
thank you
bored.
so much. I'm not sure if I am more varied or more knowledgeable after this or both, but definitely I feel like I have to go back to my HR and fight. Few quick questions, and if you want to ask question now, you have either the options of putting on the chat box and I can read it out, or you can just raise your hand, and please do that because you're going to have a lot of questions. I don't want just everyone shouting into you. So we allow another maybe 10-15 minutes questions. Dom, would that be okay?
I'm good, yeah.
Have you had a Red Bull or a coffee or whatever?
Yeah, I'm good.
So you can read out the questions. I can read out for you either way. I trust you. You can leave this side or the other one either way. That's perfect. Or whenever you feel like you want to put
Pardon?
I can read out the questions if you want.
yeah, no, hold on, don't worry. No, I can read that because I think the first one was Mayada, who, if I'm on a long-term sick leave on the 2016 contract, does that mean that I will get paid only basic pay?
That's complicated. So everyone is entitled, and I don't have the facts off the top of my head, but basically everyone is entitled to amount of paid sick leave. And someone in the audience may know these figures, but you're basically entitled to a period of time at full pay. And then you're entitled, I think, to a period of time at reduced pay. I have a feeling it's half, but please forgive me if
It's 6 months full pay, and then a couple of months half pay, and then it goes into your SSP.
Great, thank you. And so it doesn't drop you down to basic. You're paid according to the contract that you were employed under, but it does vary and it does drop down. But no, just because you go off on sick leave, it shouldn't just automatically default you to basic pay. You should have had a contract and a job, and you're paid according to that contract and job. I'm not an expert in sick leave, but that's yeah.
Danusha probably logged in a little later, but she's asking, I am on in 2016 contract as a LED, or no, actually no, she's probably was here for the beginning. And I have a basic pay and banding in payslip. What does that mean?
It means you're probably not on the 2016 pay scale. If you have banding, you are being paid either your HR is just putting stupid terms, stupid names to things on your payslip and it's wrong. But far more likely, it means that they've told you that you're being contracted according to 2016 contract for most contractual elements, but they are still paying you according to the 2002 pay scales. Banding does not exist in the 2016 terms and conditions. So I would go to your, yeah.
I asked the question. So in my payslip, it says in same payslip it says I'm in 2016 contract, but in the income side it says I only have the basic pay and the banding.
So I would clarify with your HR and say, you say that I'm paid on the 2016 terms and conditions, but my payslip says banding. Banding is not part of the 2016 terms and conditions. Please, could you clarify how my pay has been calculated and ask the question? Because that situation doesn't mean anything. It means that you're being paid according to the 2002. So if you've been told differently, you need to get clarity. And after you've emailed HR, if they come back to you and you're still not sure what's going on, just contact me. You can use this email address and I can try and support you more specifically.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Dom. Naomi is giving us another money saving tip. So if someone here is actually lucky enough to earn more than £100,000 a year, and then you can do or have an SIPP, which is a self-invested personal pension.
Correct.
Freedom.
Yes.
Thank
So,
you.
so the £100,000 above that, you start to lose your tax-free allowance. So basically, your effective rate of tax goes up because it's eating away to that amount that was tax-free. However, remember that I said that pension is not taxable. So if you put pension money into a pension elsewhere, it reduces your taxable pay bracket, so it goes down, which is great. But also remember that let's say you're earning £102,000. First of all, it would only chip away at a little bit of your tax, a little bit in tax, but also taxable pay is only basic pay in London waiting. So actually, all those sorry, it's after pension. So if you're paying pension, it brings it down to below 100. But there are other ways that you can save money if you're falling into this that people refer to it as the 100K tax trap. Charitable donations are also tax exempt. So if you want to, then you can give money to charity, and you won't lose that money. If you have children, and this is a complete tangent, but is relevant to this threshold, if you have children and you claim kind of child benefits, nursery hours, anything relating to children, the second you go above £100,000, you lose all of those benefits. So while your tax rate gradually increases slowly above 100K, if you tip £1 above 100K, you lose all of your child benefits. So then in that situation, it's worth investing in a personal pension or giving some money to charity or doing something because it's more valuable. Anyway, that's a massive tangent. Thank you for the tip. It's really helpful.
Thank you. So Nicola asking about maternity pay, is it going to be checked by the doctor's paycheck?
Oh, you asked the best question in the world. So we have been working for the last God knows how many months at creating a maternity pay calculator. It's incredible. I'm incredibly proud of it. We'll be hopefully launching in a couple of weeks. And it's specifically for doctors that are eligible for NHS maternity pay and occupational maternity pay, which you will be. And it will do everything for you, including all of those confusing points where the pay scales increased, all of the back pay. If you changed grade, all of that stuff, it will calculate it for you. And along with that, we're also going to release a maternity leave calculator that will work out how much accrued annual leave you accrue if you're on maternity leave. So you can adjust some fancy sliders to work out exactly when you want to go back to work and how much mat leave and accrued leave you'll take and all of these different things. So right now, no, but in a month, hopefully we will have launched it and it will be wonderful. I hope. I have a lot of testing to do. Thank you for
Vishal asks, where and when is the additional pay element is added? How do I check? If not received, should I check with HR then?
Okay, so there are two places. First of all, if I assume you're talking about additional pay, additional hours on the 2016 contract, you'll see that in two places. You'll see that in your work schedule. And remember, you must get a work schedule. And if you don't have one, you must ask HR and be like, where's my work schedule? and it will have a breakdown of your salary, and it'll say basic pay, additional hours, 9 hours, weekends, etc. And then you can check your pay slips, and it will say on your pay slips, I can shoot back to the slide. Ping. Oh, not that, literally not that one. Here, additional rostered hours. That's the additional hours. Night duty is the night, weekend is weekend, non-resident on call is non-resident on call, etc. So it will say it there as well. So those are the two places where you can check for additional hours and every other pay element.
Dom, what happens to our pension when you leave the UK after a few years or even a month?
Yeah, great question. So full disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a super pension expert, but I've got a good intention. So take all this with a pinch of salt. But basically, it's still your pension. You've paid into it. And when you reach UK retirement age, you can be like, can I have my pension, please? And they'll pay you the £50 a month or whatever that your pension is worth. So it's still yours. But if you don't want it, then I would opt out earlier rather than later. But it is still your pension, and it's still you. So I didn't go into too much detail, but you basically buy subscription years. This is not official terminology. This is just the way that I think about it. And for each year that you subscribe to the pension scheme, you get a little token that says, I have 1 year subscription, and this token is worth the 1/54th of your pension will pay. So if you stay in the UK for 4 years, you take your 4 pension tokens and you go somewhere else for the rest of your life. When you reach UK retirement age, you can still be like, I've got my pension tokens, can I have my pension, please? And they should pay it to you. There may be, and there probably is, more nuance and caveats to that, but I'm not a pension expert, but that it's still yours.
Sorry, is there something like if you do abruptly decide to leave the UK after 2 or 3 years, you weren't decisive before that, you can probably get in touch with the pensions and ask them for a refund?
I imagine that someone in this audience knows better than me about that. My understanding is yes, but I have nothing to back that up.
Can I answer this, Dom? Yeah. So, Dom, that was a lovely presentation. I mean, you should be our finance minister, really. So, answering to the NHS thing, if you're getting a refund within 2 years, as you're signed in, yes, you will be getting that refund. But once you cross the 2 years of barrier, then yes, your pension gets stuck or whatever remains with the pension department for the next 55 years or whatever the age limit is. Again, when I called the NHSB, they did mention it will be holded in the account, but you have to call them from your country and give them the account detail, whether it will be your whatever country where you are residing, but that will be too complicated. But what's that? The reply was that the amount will be there with them preserved, and you have to give them updated bank details so that at the age of 55 or whatever 60, your amount will be deposited into that account. That's it.
Incredible. Thank you so much for that. Can I actually ask you, is it 2 years and then it's all locked? So let's say I were to work for 3 years, pay 3 years of pension, and then I wanted to, can I claim back the last 2 years, or is it's done?
No. The only eligibility is within first 2 years you can take it back, but then that's it. You cross 2 years 1 month, that's it. You can't take it back. Is
Great,
that
thank you.
all or none phenomena?
Okay, that's super useful for me. So thank you so much for teaching me. The one thing I would say is this NHS pension is linked to the UK retirement age, which will go up. I think it's 67 now. It's going to keep creeping up. So just to bear that in mind. Okay, that's enough on that.
Okay, a few more questions in the last 4 minutes. Naomi, do these pay calculation errors also affect doctors on contract handling PAs?
Yeah, so you're describing basically SAS or consultant contracts. The short answer is yes. They are, as far as I'm not a consultant, I've done less work with consultant pay. I know from speaking to my consultant colleagues that they absolutely do happen, but they're not as bad because those contracts are simpler to calculate pay. So errors happen, but all of that leave adjustment, all the different elements, all that stuff, it's not as nuanced and complex.
So a few people already realize that they are wrongly on 2002 contract, but we're told that they are on 2016 contract or pending. So we already saved a few hundred thousand maybe pounds. So thank you, Dom, for that. I can see it in the
Yeah,
chat.
and more importantly, go and tell your HR and be like, literally, what are you doing? Because you said they have lied to you. If they're saying you're on the 2016 contract, that comes with a contract. You can literally Google it 2016 or resident doctor contract. So if they're paying you banding, non-contractual.
And Piotr asked, is the doctor's paycheck designed for resident doctor only?
Yes.
For birth
Yes.
science?
So it's specific.
If you
We
look-
intend.
So LED.
It's designed for, so well, first a broad clarification. Resident doctors is anyone who used to be called a junior doctor. So locally employed doctors are still resident doctors. It's basically anyone who works in a hospital that's not on an SAS or a consultant contract. We're all resident doctors together. The doctor's paycheck is currently only for doctors who are employed on the 2016 terms and conditions. So for example, at Great Ormond Street, you are not on the 2016 terms and conditions if you're a locally employed doctor. We're trying to change it because they're underpaying you. But that's a whole other thing. But yeah, doctor's paycheck currently is designed only for 2016 terms and conditions. We would like at some point to expand it, but it's literally just a team of 2 and a guy who does the programming for us.
And the last 2 questions. Hi, just to reconfirm that trust supplements, 40% of basic pay, which we are getting, will not be included in the pensionable pay.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay, great.
Correct.
And the last question is from Ug, who's asking, I'm a specialty doctor, my pay slip just pays the basic 40 hours, that's 10 PAs, and then an extra 2 PAs. This extra 2 PAs is set to be covered or covers for the nights and out of hours. They don't pay weekends or nights or any other thing. Is that common?
So the short answer is that's correct. The longer answer is I've got a good amount of knowledge, but I'm not an expert in specialty SAS and consultant contracts in the same way that I am for the resident doctor stuff. But what I will say is it's done completely differently. So it's done based on PAs, which is programmed activities. And effectively what that means, a PA is in effect, it's meant to be 4 hours. So 10 PAs is 5 8-hour working days. However, if you work nights and out of hours, they don't pay you night pay and weekend pay. They just pay you more PAs. So for example, you might do a night shift, and instead of it saying, you work 12 hours overnight, instead of going, that's 3 PAs, 4 times 3, they'll go, okay, it's 5 PAs or 6 PAs. So it'll just be more. So and weekends again will be, there'll be an amount of time that is deemed to be 1 PA's worth for a weekend night. So your pay will be based in PAs, but you shouldn't expect to see kind of night pay or weekend pay or non-resident on-call pay in the same way that you do for the resident doctor contract. Actual specialty doctor and consultant stuff is a whole other talk, but yeah, that's probably right, without knowing more details.
Dom, that's it. Thank you so much for this last 120 minutes of constant information.
No worries. A
Keeping
pleasure.
at least 41% alive and still paying attention to you. I think we just made another record. So thank you so much for this. I think we can get into another section about all the errors that HR can do. And I probably think that we will get you back on a yearly, monthly basis.
You can buy me a coffee at work.
This was amazing. So we
It was a
recorded
pleasure.
everything, and it will be on our YouTube channel. So if you go onto the website, I was constantly posting on the chat. You will find it probably very soon. Give us a few days, maybe a week, and it will be on the YouTube channel. But Dom, huge thank you, and
It was
have a good
a
night,
pleasure.
everyone. Bye bye, guys.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye. Bye bye.